So HR director, director of people, chief people officer, VP of people and culture. There's like so many different titles, but all with similar challenges and issues. So this podcast is all about the top job in HR. And to help me explore these challenges and hopefully to offer some solutions, I'm joined by my co-founder of Disruptive HR, Karen Moran. Hello, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm good. Thank you, Lucy.
So I think we've agreed, haven't we, that we're going to refer to the top job as the CPO, aren't we?
Because it's easy.
Yeah, and it kind of fits in, doesn't it, with the rest of the C-suite. So we've got the CEO, we've got the CFO, we've got the CIO, etc. And it's got the word people in it,
Hey.
which, hey. And whilst that might feel like a bit of a kind of non-issue, the people versus HR debate kind of neatly brings us, I think, to our first challenge, which is being responsible for people rather than finance or tech, etc. Sort of, whereas if you head up numbers or technology or logistics or procurement, like no one wants to challenge your expertise, do they? Like no one has any problems kind of accepting your recommendations when you've done some research, and if you put forward your view, it's like everybody accepts it if you're in one of those. But when it comes to people, no one has any problem challenging our expertise, do they? So I always remember there was a guy that I knew, and he'd been, I think he was head of logistics at Virgin Media, and a guy called Morris. Hello, Morris, if you're listening. And he was given the HR job. He didn't have an HR background, but I was chatting to him one day and he said, it just amazes me. He said, when I was head of logistics, he said, I would say if I was being asked to do a recommendation to the board, I would like do my research and I would come with my proposal to the board and I would make my recommendations and nobody would say anything. They'd all be like, yeah, that sounds like a really good idea, Morris. Now I'm head of people. He said, I do the same. I do my research. I kind of draw up my proposals. I bring it to the board. I make my recommendations and everyone piles in. It's like, oh no, that's rubbish, a rubbish idea, And
so I think it's from.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that kind of sense of being the so-called expert of people can be challenging for CPOs. Everyone seems to have a point of view.
Yeah. And what's our response as a CPO? I think we've tried to be more like them, haven't we? We've adopted the language. We talk about human capital. We bring in the metrics. So we've got our engagement scores and our performance ratings. And we've sort of wrapped ourselves up in a lot of process to try and perhaps be more like them. But I'm not sure it's actually helped our credibility.
No, I think you're right.
Yeah, and maybe we are better off embracing the fact and being proud of the fact that we know about people. Brilliant, annoying, complicated, messy human beings. And maybe we should be happy that that's our superpower.
But you're not suggesting that we should, as CPOs, become like all trained psychologists or something?
No. It's nice if you can, but you don't have to be. And I think if we think about some of the CPOs that we know, who we see having the most impact, they're just the ones that are moving away from those kind of traditional processes and thinking about how can I design an approach to HR around how human beings think, feel, behave, are motivated. So, let's take, for example, traditional performance management, it being employee owned, it involving frequent check-ins, no horrible ratings of meet expectations, to changing traditional training programs, so away from the kind of, we're going to put you on a week's course, to micro-learning, 5-minute videos, making the most of the talent you've already got inside your organisation. So going much more for peer-to-peer learning, moving away from those kind of horrible top-down change programs that are kind of 5 years long to
Yeah.
just adaptable, small, bite-sized changes, making use of early adopters, etc. So I think all the changes that we're seeing with traditional HR processes reflect that the most modern CPOs are comfortable designing around human centered approaches about
Yeah.
how human beings think and feel, and they're happy to say, yeah, I am, I'm going to be the people expert.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And of course, there's always going to be some leaders, aren't there, who won't listen to us, even if we are embracing these human-centered approach. And I think for me, this brings us to, and I know you agree with me because we've talked about it, but, I think arguably the most common issue amongst the CPOs that we meet, and we meet a lot,
Yeah.
is that they worry, don't they, that they just don't have the influence that they would like to have. They don't feel that they're listened to. They're worrying that they're not having any kind of impact. And I can really relate to this. I remember getting my first CPO role, and suddenly, there I am in like the big boys room, and they were all men apart from me,
Yeah.
these 50-year-old plus something guys who were all chief execs, of their division, their respective business. And I was just kind of so nervous about being able to influence them, to be heard.
Yeah. So what worked for you?
Well, I think there was a couple of things. I suppose for me, the most important tip I would give CPOs who are new in role is just to get to know them. I mean, like really get to know them, understand their business, get a strong sense of what drives them on an individual level, which buttons to press, which buttons to avoid, what worries them, what excites them, and get a sense of what might make them change their mind. I'd kind of started off working really hard on kind of business cases and trying to write a really great board paper. But, of course, these weren't going to change anyone's mind. I would present data, but we know that most data is received in a way that we're looking for confirmation of our own existing worldview, so that confirmation bias. I would give a kind of one size fits all business case, this one board paper that was actually trying to cover off all of their objections or all of their needs and wants and buttons I should and shouldn't be pressing. At this kind of narrow piece of analysis with data and a clear rationale was just never going to work. And what I realized is that I actually needed a strategy for each of them. So my CEO at the time, he was really driven by being able to beat the competition. So it was pointless me going to him with data around, say, performance management and, it's not working, it's not motivating people. But if I told him that our nearest and dearest competitors were doing something different, he would be on it like a flash. It would be like, right, come on, let's do it. So it was about really kind of tapping into what mattered to him. There was another one that if I tried to roll anything out, they would always go on about how their business area was special and different. So I realized that I needed to reflect the fact that I had tailored it for them. Even if in the end it wasn't wildly different, they had a sense that their needs were being met. So I think that would be my first tip, is kind of really get to know them. And then the second one is something that we talk to CPOs about a lot, which is just don't worry so much about the biggest resistors. We spend our lives diluting, compromising, delaying, giving up because the biggest resistors are making so much noise. I always reflect on my time when I was at the BBC, and I had this person who shall remain nameless, but he or she was like my nemesis, right? Everything I tried to do, they would be very antagonistic. They'd be very vocal about how it wasn't going to work. It wouldn't work for their area of the organization. And I would involve them in every consultation group. I would make sure that I'd kind of taken their views and adapt it. And they would still, in the end, reject it. So I think this kind of concept of going with the early adopters,
Yeah.
we've all got, haven't we, a few managers or leaders in our organization who are a bit more open, a bit more curious. They might not be the greatest leaders in the world, but they are willing to work with us. And so I think kind of working out who those early adopters might be, who are usually actually the ones who are frustrated with the status quo. And if we don't meet their needs, then they go rogue and they kind of go off and do their own thing. But quite often I would ignore them to focus on the biggest resistors. Well, actually, I wish I'd spent more time with them, and then get them to kind of, talk about it and what's working and get them to help promote it. And, we've even tried tactics with clients now where the biggest resistors, you kind of openly exclude them.
Yeah.
It's kind of saying,
Have to do this.
you don't have to do this. Don't you worry about this. Isn't for you. And they hate that, don't they? Because they're used to being the problem child who gets all of the attention. So I think those would be my two things. It's like really get to know them. A one size fits all board paper is not going to convince everybody. You've got to think about individual strategies, and you can only do that if you really, really know them on a human level. And the second one would be to kind of make sure that you're not wasting your time, your talents, your energies on the biggest resistors.
Yeah, I think building on that, obviously, if you're thinking about larger groups of leaders, it would be very difficult to have a strategy for each one of them. But
if you've got like 2,000 leaders, you're not going to have 2,000 strategies, are you?
But we can use personas. So if we think about personas, you probably could have maximum 3, but that would probably work for you. So identifying 3 leader types, and then just work through what would make them want to change. And of course, again, going back to our using these early adopters, using peer-to-peer learning, often it just resonates more with them than just hearing from us. And I think the other tactic is giving them more options.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing more frustrating for our leaders when we're kind of saying, this is it, go and implement it in your area. But actually, if we can show and recognize that they're all going to be different, that they are special, that particular business unit is special, and giving them choices, I think really is powerful for us. So we could say, for example, how do you want to adapt this approach to performance management that suits your area? Or why don't you have your own survey tool that you can ask your team how things are going? Things like that will, I think, really help us get buy-in.
Yeah, and it means that we relax a little bit, this idea that everybody's got to do it in exactly the same way. I think showing that we recognize the differences in the business. I was talking to one CPO recently, and he was telling me that they have a really clear strategy that they never do mass rollouts of HR initiatives. It's all about recognizing that they've got very different elements, from warehousing to, shops, retail to head office and so on. I absolutely agree with that. There's another challenge that we hear a lot about, and that their CPOs are struggling with, and it's just the kind of the sheer amount of work that they've got to do, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, God, we can think about our own experiences. It just feels like you're spending all day in meetings. You've got all of this transactional stuff that somehow does need to be done. And it's hard to know that, to take the time to look up and out. It's almost like you feel that you're being naughty by taking that time to learn and grow and try and have kind of more innovative ideas. And you're just often so tired, aren't you? It's just can't face it. And sometimes if you're not getting that pressure from your executives, it's easy just to kind of go, just carry on doing this because it's just a little bit easier. So what would your solution to that be, Lucy?
Yeah, I mean, I remember it so vividly, that kind of, I remember one day I had like 14, because they were, broken into 20 minutes and half hours and stuff, 14 back-to-back meetings. And you get back to your desk and you're like, right, I need to have some big strategic thoughts here. So actually, I'll just go home and eat some chocolate.
Definitely.
So I think there's a number of things that we can do as CPOs. I think one of the first things is being really clear, what can we actually stop doing? So much of what I used to do as a CPO, and I know the same for you and other CPOs that we meet, is that we are chasing compliance with some of our processes. We're not the compliance officer. We talk a lot, don't we, about this kind of adult to adult approach. But we don't have to ensure compliance. We don't, this kind of idea that, well, how will we know if they've done it? Well, ask people if they've done it. But this idea that we're always chasing, and I think a lot of effort goes into that. So being clear what we can stop. Also, do we have to own it? We own the engagement survey, the annual reviews, performance management system, and so on. And you gave an example earlier about the survey tools. Instead of it all being owned and driven and monitored by HR, could we actually just give the tools to managers and let them implement it? Now, of course, there's going to be some managers that won't do it, but let's face it, they're probably having their employees are probably having a poorer experience anyway, aren't they? So making them do stuff, I don't think necessarily helps that experience. I think we can be better at focusing on the outputs and outcomes that we want from leaders and managers rather than, and this is how you have to do it. Yeah. We can still measure it, but let's measure accountability for the achievement of those outcomes. That classic one that we both love, SAP, where they said to their people leaders, we want you to show appreciation, lead with trust, and coach your team. And we're not going to tell you how to do it necessarily, but we are going to ensure that you're meeting those outcomes, and we're going to do pulse surveys and check. Yeah. When I first became a CPO, I remember going and asking very experienced CPOs kind of just for some tips. And people gave me, I'm sure, lots and lots of useful advice. But there's one bit of advice that really stands out. And that was a guy who was a CPO at this big pharmaceutical company. And he said, Lucy said, it's very, very simple. He said, just get good people in and bad people out. And I just thought, I wish I'd stuck to that in some ways. I think I'd have been a much more effective CPO if I'd just focused on that, good people in, bad people out. Unfortunately, I did get waylaid on all the other minutiae that we do. I think there's another thing, probably final tip on this kind of how can we create more headspace, create more time, is let's learn from product designers, product manufacturers, that you only have 2 or 3 things on the go at any one time, and you and I mean, we were terrible, weren't we? We used to have our strategic plans, multiple priorities under each strategic priority. Remember when we put up all the yellow stickies along the filing cabinets with each one had a
like an action colour stickies.
Oh, were they? I didn't remember that.
On the theme.
Oh my God. And this thing
really,
just stretched.
Really motivating, didn't we?
We anticipated everyone coming up the stairs, seeing this long line of stickies and going, wow, let me just get going. And of course, everyone just wanted to go home immediately when they saw that. It was just exhausting. So, I think the HR teams, the CPOs that we see having a real impact are much more aware that actually they can use sprint planning, focus on a small number of products at any one time, and really kind of drive those rather than trying to focus on too much.
Yeah. I think as well, it's probably worth us reflecting about how much our HR teams are still doing for managers.
Yeah.
It's almost a bit of an elephant in the room. And, we know that organisations are saying that leadership development is probably their biggest priority. Yet we're not really helping this, are we? Because we've slipped into this kind of nursemaid role where we're kind of doing everything for them because maybe we don't trust them to do it right, or maybe it's because it gives us I know myself, it gave me a sense of sort of my credibility was around being able to help them.
Yeah, they kind of go, oh, I couldn't do it without you.
Yeah, but
And then you realise all you've done is write up the notes from that grievance meeting, or you've had that conversation that they should have been having.
so I think for CPOs, their focus has to be on getting their HR team or their business partners or whatever the model is, shifting toward much more of a consultancy and coaching style. So we've got to be building managers' confidence and capability to handle their own people issues, which of course we know is going to have a much bigger impact on their team's experience at work. Us doing it for them is not helping that.
No.
And it's not giving them that accountability. I think we've kind of made this problem in a way by being there for them. And actually, if we can build their confidence, they can do it themselves and they probably will do it really well.
Yeah.
But we just got to let go a bit.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Okay, let's kind of look at a final challenge. I mean, obviously there are loads of challenges of being a CPO. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that these are the only few that we've got to deal with, but I think one that doesn't get mentioned very often is it's actually really lonely being a CPO. You're often having to kind of deal with lots of sensitive information, aren't you? And so you can't share that information. And of course, everyone else is allowed to have a complete meltdown, but you're expected to be 100% resilient, aren't you?
Yeah, you're not allowed to have any problems at all.
No.
I can remember actually going through a big office closure, and it was about a year-long program, and we were either relocating people to a different office or making redundancies. It was a brutal 12 months, but for me, I mean, everybody was going through a lot, so you kind of feel like, well, we're all going through it. But I was the kind of HR villain. I was the one delivering, labeled as the person delivering the bad news. I was doing it to everybody, and I can remember just feeling very excluded. So because it was over 12 months, it's all anybody wanted to talk about. So, around the pubs at lunchtime, the water cooler moments, that's all anybody wanted to talk about.
Did they all go quiet when you kind of walked into oh no, that's so horrible.
Not getting invited to the pub at lunchtime and, no one would talk openly in front of me. And I kind of felt I understood where they were coming from because I was constantly being taken into rooms with the door closed, and it was not nice. And it wasn't nice for people to see me as the face of something that they were really upset about.
Yeah.
Particularly for me, because I know some people say that you have to be really tough in HR, but I hate not being liked, and it was bad. It was bad. It was a brutal 12 months.
And I don't think there's any easy answer. We're always going to be dealing with sensitive and quite often difficult information and projects that will have an impact on people, sometimes positive, but often not positive, particularly as you say around restructures and things like that. So I don't think there's a really easy answer to that. But I think making sure that you've got a solid network of peers and having people outside of your organization, not just inside. And I think, again, back to what we were saying earlier, if all you're doing is looking in and down because you're so busy, then you stop kind of connecting with other people. I remember when I was at the BBC, I would go out for dinner probably once or twice a year with the HR director of Channel 4, the HR director of Sky, and the HR director of ITV. For those people who are not listening in the UK, those are obviously the other main broadcasters in the UK pre-Netflix.
Yes.
And we would go out for dinner, and whoever was having the hardest time the others would pay for their dinner.
Oh,
and I did used to win quite often, actually. But just the sheer joy of being able, within reason, be able to share what was going on for me, for them, quite often you'd end up laughing. And I think also having a great team of people who are sharing that they can't always take all of it away from you, but they can take some of it. And again, our team at the BBC was magnificent for that, wasn't it? You
Yeah,
know, they were, again, we would end up laughing. We'd kind of start with our heads in our hands and, you know, particularly at very difficult, challenging times, but we would end up laughing, and, you know, you just felt this kind of renewed energy. So I think there's something about, you know, making sure that you're looking after your own mental health, and don't imagine that you've got to be a superhero.
yeah,
You know, kind of take time for you to learn and connect. And as you said, you know, we don't always kind of seem to value ourselves highly enough to make time for this, but it will really help us in the long run.
absolutely.
So I think that's probably it for today. We really hope that you've
Chat.
enjoyed this episode. And if you are a CPO and you just want to share what's going on for you, do get in touch with us. The contact info is in the podcast notes. But for now, goodbye, and see you next time.
Bye.